Now, of course, let's start with number 10, and this would be Kenpachi Zaraki. Now, this is definitely going to come to a surprise to many of you, especially when taking into consideration how much of a monster Kenpachi really is. Just to give you an even broader idea, when it comes to facing off against the Quincy and their leader, Ywhach, Kenpachi was labeled as one of the 5 special threats to come against the Quincy army in the Thousand-Year Blood War, with Kenpachi's most notable attribute being his combat strength, and for good reason. While fighting against special threats on numerous occasions, he would have no special ability of his own, yet still hold up in battle, and even rival captains of the Soul Society. To go into detail, Kenpachi has went a long time without having a bankai and has only specialized in using his own combat prowess and strength to take down anyone that was foolish enough to actually fight him. Kenpachi has made it so far without a bankai, and this really speaks to how dangerous he really is. Imagine him having it in his own possession like the other Soul Reapers. With only his Shikai, Kenpachi was able to cut down a giant meteor in one slice, and this entire meteor was big enough to take down the entire Serete in one fell swoop. The meteor was so big that the shield surrounding the Serete couldn't even obliterate it because it was too much mass for the shield to take in. But with one swing of his sword in its Shikai state, Kenpachi was able to split it in two and send a bunch of tiny meteor chunks to rain down on the battlefield, completely destroying the meteor that would have killed everybody on the site of the Thousand-Year Blood War. And if that isn't enough for you, Kenpachi was even able to cut through space itself with his Shikai. To make matters even worse for anyone that would try and fight this monster, if Kenpachi were to ever use his bankai, he would become stronger than he already is, which is an insane feat in of itself. With Kenpachi's regular strength on its own, he's able to lift the foot of a giant and cause him to trip across the entire Serete. Now imagine him using his bankai. He only gets stronger while facing off against the same giant in his bankai state. By simply biting the giant's fist, he's able to rip off his entire arm with his mouth. Most swordsmen would struggle to do this, yet Kenpachi didn't even have to use his sword in this instance. He would also cut this giant in half with one swing of his weapon. It isn't too far-fetched to say that Kenpachi could cut through anything. Number 9, Ichigo Kurosaki. This may come to be a huge surprise to a majority of you, but by watching further into the video, you will begin to understand why the placement is the way it is. Ichigo is quite literally a powerhouse, and he was also one of the 5 special threats that were chosen to be able to defeat Ywhach. Now, what would separate Ichigo from everyone else and also classify him as a special threat? That would be his potential. When it comes to Ichigo in any single fight, even with all the cards stacked against him, Ichigo always has the potential to win in a fight. And it's pretty obvious after we've seen time and time again how Ichigo is able to win against all of his opponents. The most prominent example of this would be Ichigo obtaining bankai. It usually takes some of the most prolific swordsmen 10 or more years in order to obtain the bankai ability, yet Ichigo only managed to get it in just 3 days. This is what makes his potential so dangerous, because you never really know what to expect from him. Even then, it's not really crazy to say that his willpower far surpasses a majority of all the characters in Bleach, with his willpower and potential allowing him to become strong enough to come back from the dead and become a demon, or even reach the status of a god. Albeit you can chalk down all of Ichigo's wins as an unnecessary or sudden power-up, this is what makes Ichigo dangerous in the first place. Ichigo might just borrow Zangetsu's power, he might just become a hollow, and he might just become a god. Maybe even the entire Soul Society might just share their power with him. Ichigo is easily the underdog that you would find yourself rooting for. He may not excel in any specific area, but what he does do is that he will make sure that he can win. And if he says he's gonna do it, he will definitely do it. When Ichigo is down, he's going to get up, and it's just that simple. The greatest assets to Ichigo's power would be his ability to use that of the Quincy's power, the Hollow's power, and a Soul Reaper's power. And with his most notable power-up being the Quincy one, you could expect him to use techniques such as Bleach Vein, which allows him to harden his body for defense. Unfortunately, he would not be able to master the technique, but he would be able to use it subconsciously if he was in a near-death state, and he would avoid getting killed, even for but a moment. This would give him a slight edge in a life or death situation. And with his powers from the Thousand Year Blood War, Ichigo would use both his Quincy and Hollow powers at the same time, and this would allow him to fuse a Gran Rei Sero alongside a Getsuga Tensho. You could really only imagine what kind of destructive force this attack would have, especially when it's not hitting a target that would completely absorb the impact. Ichigo's strength is in a league of its own, and he's made it this far by only using the Getsuga Tensho, which is really something to think about, especially when it comes to Ichigo's potential. Number 8. Gerard Valkyrie. This character in of itself is completely broken and really had to die due to plot armor, and I'm not making this up. Without a doubt, Gerard Valkyrie was one of the last remaining Quincy during the Blood War, and even so, he really didn't even lose in a fight. His ability is monstrous, with it being that of a miracle. Whenever Gerard gets attacked or killed, his body comes back stronger and bigger than ever before. And attempting to fight this guy would be the last thing you'd ever want to do. In fact, he quite literally has God's favor. And with this same favor, this allows him to survive any fatal wounds, such as getting his entire body cut in half. He would still be able to put his body back together due to a sigil putting everything back in its rightful place. And if you think that's the craziest thing he could possibly survive from, he can come back from having his entire body frozen and crushed into tiny little pieces, and his entire body will literally just rebuild itself. He seems pretty much unstoppable. Honestly, he is unstoppable. As if it wasn't already hard enough to kill Gerard as it is, even if you try to attack him and you end up hitting his sword from him defending himself, if the sword becomes chipped, you will end up taking any damage that his sword has taken. Even then, the beam attack that comes out of Gerard's sword was strong enough to level the entire civilization that the Soul Reapers and the Quincy's were fighting on, which would split the entire landmass in half. If it wasn't obvious enough already, Gerard is really broken. Number 7, Kisuke Urahara. This placement may be confusing for some of you, but Urahara has definitely earned his spot as number 7, even above Ichigo and Gerard. Urahara, like Kenpachi and Ichigo, was also said to be one of the 5 special threats that could help defeat Ywhach, with Urahara's special perk being his incalculable tricks. And it's only natural to want to have your guard up against Urahara because after all, he has an IQ higher than Aizen. And Aizen would even acknowledge this himself. In order to understand why Urahara was placed above other characters in the list, comes from knowing how his ability works. With that being said, we'd have to take a look at Urahara versus Askin. And Askin's ability would give him the opportunity to make oxygen and nitrogen themselves poisonous to anyone he wants to kill. To be more precise, he can make anything poisonous just as long as he ingests it. For example, if he were to take in a lot of blood, he could make your own blood poisonous to you and you would be laid out dead. Askin would even cause Ichigo to be laid face to the ground and Ichigo would be unable to fight him at all. This says a lot about Ichigo's endurance in comparison to Urahara. Whether it be nitrogen, oxygen, and quite possibly even his own blood becoming poisonous, Ichigo would not be able to endure such a thing, let alone reishi poisoning. However, Urahara can withstand all of these things and fight to a point where he should actually be dead. Urahara's body would be pushed to a point where he could barely crawl, yet he would be able to endure this and still fight and run at his opponent, Granted, it probably wouldn't even be at the max speed that he's capable of. This says a lot about what kind of league he is in as a fighter in comparison to not only Ichigo, but the rest of the cast in Bleach. Every other character was practically dead or knocked out, yet Urahara was still able to fight. Even then, it only gets worse for his opponents, because with Urahara's bankai, he is able to reconstruct anything that Benihime touches. Now, most people look at this and think that this has to be something that Urahara has to touch with his hand directly, but that wouldn't be the case. Anything that is affected by his bankai and the reconstruction that it does is affected by whatever Benihime touches, with Benihime also being a part of the strings that are touching whatever's around him. In simpler terms, whatever comes into contact with Benihime's strings becomes reconstructed. And this becomes clearer when we take a look at the ground right by Grimmjow's feet, because Urahara never directly touched these locations with his body or hands. He just allowed the strings to travel up the buildings, and this would help compensate for his lack of range. Just by simply being near Urahara, you're in danger of being reconstructed. And if you are out of his range for being reconstructed, he can always trick you and find a way for the strings to touch you, or he can just move closer to you and then attack you directly with the reconstruction itself from being within his range. And not only does his bankai allow him to restore his eyes that were gouged out, this bankai also allows him to use the true potential of his mind and completely trick or trap his opponents into getting reconstructed, which gives Urahara the potential to even kill someone like Gerard, because if Gerard is having his body reconstructed, like we see where Gerard's body is putting itself back together due to the Quincy sigil, if his body's being reconstructed, he will not be able to do this. Even then, Gerard's body could be reconstructed into nothingness, and in order to avoid having him obtain a miracle, his body would just be reconstructed into a point to where he could no longer fight. I really want you guys to understand just how broken this ability is. Urahara has a ranged bankai, and if you are in his range, you're already practically dead unless you quickly move out of his range. And if you're not in his range, Urahara will spread his strings to a point in which you would be within his range. This would practically give him unlimited range with his bankai. There may be a specific range for the strings being able to reconstruct their targets, but there's nothing stopping Urahara from allowing the strings to travel towards you and allow them to be in range. There is a range, but nothing is stopping that range from traveling, which earned Urahara this spot on the list. Number 6, Yamamoto Genryusai. Is there really anything that really needs to be said about the qualities of the head captain of the Soul Society? Literally, it's taken 1,000 years for anyone to even come close to his power, which they haven't. But in all seriousness, he is the strongest Soul Reaper to date. Genryusai's strength is quite literally unmatched. By simply using his bare hands, he will leave an entire hole in your body from a single punch. And even then, the force of the punch will cause you to fly through multiple buildings. If that doesn't give you a clear idea of how strong Genryusai is, there's a lot more to come. Simply by standing in his presence, you would turn to ashes, even if you're standing at a distance. If Ywhach was not using Blood Vein, which is a defensive Quincy technique, he would have been reduced to ashes from Genryusai's presence alone, and that's not all. We haven't even talked about Genryusai's sword yet. To put it simply, when he swings his sword, you're dead. There's nothing left. You will be gone, you will be incinerated, and there will not be a single speck of your life left behind. With a single swipe of his sword, Genryusai's enemies are burned to the bone. And with these same sword swipes, explosions are left in his wake, and these same explosions will just burn anything that is unfortunate enough to be in his path. And if that's not enough, by simply standing, Genryusai can burn the entirety of the Soul Society to the ground. I don't think I need to go into further detail about him at all. But I know you're definitely interested, so we'll go into a little bit more detail. he can summon an army of 1,000,000,000,000 corpses that will stop at nothing until they burn their opponents to death. So not only are you fighting the strongest Soul Reaper in 1,000 years, but also 1,000,000,000,000 other warriors at the same time. If that isn't bad, he can even sacrifice his limbs and practically nuke you with an explosion of flames. If you fight him, your death is guaranteed. Number 5. Uryu Ishida. Now, I know this may be confusing for some of you, especially since Uryu was Ichigo's rival, and he just so how happens to end up taking the back seat a majority of the time. But don't worry, this isn't to take away from him, because he is great in his own ways. To be frank, there's one thing that Uryu will always have over Ichigo, and that's his stark intelligence and precision. And this would inevitably make him go a long way. Time and time again, we've seen Uryu win through cunning and planning and the occasional Quincy power-up. Not only this, but he does have the traditional method of using Quincy arrows by taking in the reishi from his environment and shooting it directly, which makes him a ranged fighter. There are many reasons as to why you can recognize Uryu as an amazing fighter. However, there's only one thing that landed him this spot on this list, with that being his antithesis. With this ability, Uryu can reverse events that have already taken place between 2 designated points. Alright, here's where coming to understand this power will finally allow you to respect just how strong Uryu really is. When it comes to the antithesis, if he were to get damaged, any damage he takes would affect anyone he wants it to. The true reason behind this power being so strong is that he can choose what happens between 2 designated points. If he were to cut himself, he could be like this. Ow, I'm hurt. Okay, now I'm not going to be the one that's cut. You're going to be cut. And it would cut his opponent. And he would not be hurt whatsoever. It gets even crazier than you could imagine because, again, he can choose between 2 points. So now let's say I were to crush a water bottle. Now, whatever happened to that water bottle being crushed, I could make happen to my opponent. And so my water bottle would no longer be crushed, but my opponent would. It even gets crazier than that because if I were to step on an ant, I could make whatever happened to that ant being crushed and being stepped on by my foot happen to my opponent. With this, you can really see why Uryu is the only one that has an ability that could challenge Ywhach. The antithesis is really just broken. Number 4, Haschwalth. Haschwalth is Ywhach's right-hand man, and for a very good reason. With his shrift, the balance, any misfortune that happens to him will inevitably happen to you. So if he gets cut, you're going to get cut. And there's literally nothing you can do about it. And also, he is a master swordsman due to training day in and day out at a young age because he appeared to not have any special qualities as a Quincy. But lo and behold, with an ability like the balance, we can begin to understand just how strong Haschwalth really is. Number 3, Ichibe Hyosube. Man, where do I even start where it comes to Ichibe? Ichibe is really a monster. He would even take on Ywhach all by himself. And rightfully so, because Ichibe would be known as one of the special 5 threats that were chosen to take down Ywhach, with his special trait being his wisdom. And with this same wisdom, Ichibe would have the power to cut your own power in half. This allows Ichibe to control any fight in the palm of his hands. If you were to face him, you already lost. Ichibe can even go as far as to taking away all your powers entirely. And he does this by taking away your name. He can take away your own name, the name of your weapon. To be fair, he can really just take away the name of anything and make it valueless. However, it doesn't stop there. He can even change your name. He can call you a black ant and you will be as strong as an ant. To be more precise, whatever Ichibe names you, you will have the qualities of. If he names you an ant, you're just gonna be as strong as an ant. And you will be crushed just like one. If Ichibe says you are an ant, then you are an ant. This is what gives him most of the control in a fight. If Ichibe says you are weak, then you are weak. This is what makes his power something that's really hard to imagine fighting back. It only gets worse because he can also manifest his limbs into giant proportions and have them summoned right in front of you, only to crush you with their massive weight and strength due to their size. Arguably, fighting him is like fighting a god. Number 2, Sosuke, Aizen. What really needs to be said about Aizen that hasn't been said already by so many other people? This guy is a genius, a master tactician, he orchestrated the plot twice, and he's a master swordsman to boot. Not even just that. His ability, Kyoka Soigetsu, is one of the best abilities in the series. Aizen would also be one of the 5 special threats, and this would be thanks to his spiritual pressure alone, with us being able to witness it eating away at the body of a guard that was trying to detain Aizen. Even so, it would be dangerous just to touch Aizen due to his spiritual pressure. Honestly, touching Aizen would probably kill you. Aizen would also just so happen to be immortal. This would earn him a spot in Muken prison, where people are sent because they cannot be killed. Even with all the means of the Soul Society alone and its best executioners, they could not find a way to stop Aizen's heart. And right when you thought Aizen was just unbeatable, he still has his trusty Kyoka Soigetsu, and by using such a thing, he will place you into an illusion that affects all 5 of your senses. And naturally, while under this illusion, you will never have the chance to even hit Aizen. And if you somehow do, which I think is pretty much impossible, you're not going to be able to kill him because he is immortal. If you so much as look at Aizen and his sword, you're dead. You lost. You already lost. Did I forget to mention that he's a master swordsman and a genius and can use Hados relatively easy? What more can I say? It's Aizen. Number 1! Ywhach. Well, the King of the Quincy's is literally the strongest character in Bleach up till now. Well, for starters, Ywhach survived being turned into an ant and being crushed. And this is because his ability, the Almighty, is broken. By simply looking at something, he cannot be killed by it. Now, how do you defeat someone like that? There's a simple question with a simple answer. You don't. And this is only the beginning. By using Saint Altar, Ywhach can take anyone's powers. He can literally steal them. Now, what are you gonna do when your powers are stolen? Nothing. Speaking of powers, Ywhach's own powers are really creative. He can inject his blood vein onto the ground and turn it into a shield, and if you somehow get past this shield, if you so much as touch him, he will spread blood vein throughout your body and make you corrode from the inside. If you so much as get near him, he will kill you. And if you thought he was stupidly strong then, little did you know, he has the power to alter the future. So whatever you do to hurt or kill him will just be changed. You literally can't win against this guy. Whatever you do against Ywhach is pointless, which earns him the #1 spot as the strongest character in Bleach as of now.